as it stands through 4, 5, 6 games in the college season, where do you see and who do you see being QB1 projecting towards the draft in 2025?
Yeah, it's tough this year because no one has emerged as that guy. And I'm glad you mentioned Carson Beck, because after last year, Carson Beck, that was his first year as a starter, 2023, in an offense that was heavily predicated on the run and on the short passing game to Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. So you saw potential and thought, hey, he might be able to become the guy. That has not been the case so far this year. You saw the turnovers against Alabama, a lot of check down type football in previous games to that one. So he hasn't emerged. Quinn Ewers was playing like a first overall pick. He gets hurt again. This is 3 years in a row now that he's missed time with an injury. Shedeur Sanders is not playing in a sophisticated offense. It's a lot of, hey, Travis Hunter, get open and I'll throw it to you. And then you mentioned Cam Ward, who is in his 5th, 6th year of college football now, going from Incarnate Ward to Washington State to Miami. He's definitely breaking through, but no one has stepped up as that guy. So it's really, and I would put Jalen Milroe from Alabama in that mix as well. Drew Allar from Penn State has played very, very well as a former 5-star prospect. So no one has stepped up this year. There is no Caleb Williams, who was like pre-anointed as a guy. There hasn't been a Jaden Daniels yet. There hasn't been a Drake May as of yet. So this year, it's much more spread out, trying to figure out who that top quarterback will be.
I love that you brought up like 2 other names. Out of those, let's start. We could go top 4. If you think it's Allar, Jalen Milroe as well, I would see it too. Do any of those guys jump out to you as a day one starter in a day when everyone says play them right away? But we're also seeing some caution tales come through the NFL of why some rookies should sit.
I am, and I hate to make a blanket statement, but I'm pretty against playing rookie quarterbacks unless you have a great structure around them. Patriots fans will remember how much they hated me for saying they probably shouldn't take a quarterback at 3. They probably should trade because I thought the roster wasn't good enough. Now they're sitting Drake May, which is something I do applaud. So I think Quinn Ewers coming out of the Texas system could play right away. It's pretty complicated what they ask players to do. Steve Sarkisian has talked about how Quinn has to do a lot pre-snap. They ask their receivers to play every position. So you're really getting a lot of moving parts that Ewers has to kind of figure out and break down. Beck, potentially, because I think Georgia does run kind of a pro-style offense, but he will be, around a 24, 25-game starter, depending on if Georgia makes a run this year. I think Cam Ward definitely has the experience. Jalen Milroe would be in that mix as well. Shedeur Sanders, I love Shedeur Sanders. He's my number 1 quarterback. He's surgical with the ball. I worry a little bit because this is not a knock on him. He's just not played in a sophisticated offense. So the big question there will come in January, February, March when we get into the combine, pro days, private workouts, is figuring out, what is the football aptitude? Because he's in this Pat Shurmur offense where it's basically like, hey, Travis Hunter, run deep or a hook route, and we're just going to bet on your athleticism. So it's going to be a lot of questions of getting through full field reads, what they understand about blocking schemes, and how ready the team around them is to get them out on the field.
I love that you bring up Shedeur Sanders and you bring up him not being in such a sophisticated system. So obviously there'll be that learning curve when he gets to the NFL. Me being a novice when it comes to looking at guys coming from college to the pros, my red flag as I see it with Shedeur is that will Deion let Shedeur be himself, or is there that baggage that comes with Coach Prime possibly talking in the media about the roster situation, all that? Do you see that as something that could affect Shedeur Sanders' draft stock?
I mean, it could. Deion has made comments that he's going to be protective and maybe even picky about where Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter play. We'll see. There have been parents in the past who are heavily involved. Bryce Young's dad was heavily involved. Caleb Williams' dad was heavily involved. So that has happened before. I understand neither of those gentlemen are NFL Hall of Famers or the head coach at the University of Colorado. So what Deion says carries some more weight behind it, certainly. But, I never want to say like this thing or that thing will affect draft stock, because something that could, Gerard Mayo might say, hey, that's not for us. But Ryan Poles with the Chicago Bears might say, like, hey, that's not a problem for us. It's truly a unique scenario where we have 32 different general managers who all think differently about what works for their locker room culture and chemistry. And then you kind of go from there. So I don't know that the presence of Deion will hurt Shedeur. I think there could be a positive of, you have a dad who's been there. He understands what it takes to be great. He knows what the grind is like. He knows what the off-field responsibilities are like. And in this day and age of NIL, these college athletes are coming to the NFL as professionals. They've had to handle off-field. They've had to handle money, advertising and marketing opportunities and requirements. So I think Shedeur is really set up well to be a great pro because he's grown up in it. He understands what that life is like.
And to look at that, but you pointed out that you absolutely love Shedeur's game and you love him as a prospect. What about him makes him overcome being in a non-sophisticated system that still has you tabbing up that is a guy that can be a quarterback in the NFL and be worth a very high draft pick?
It's the accuracy. It's phenomenal. Rarely does he miss. And, unlike a guy like Carson Beck, my big complaint would be he doesn't lead his receivers open. Mm-hmm. He's kind of all over the place. His guys catch it, but he's kind of all over the place. I think with Shedeur, you see him consistently throwing his guys open. And also there are times where he has to throw a dot, and he can do that. He can stick the ball in your chest, or he has that kind of understanding of, let me put the ball here that's going to run you into space, or let me put the ball here so the defender can't make a play on it. So he just has that kind of innate ability to understand where to put the ball. A lot of people, you're going to hear it, he holds the ball too long. Again, bad offensive line, not a sophisticated offense. And I would spin that, George, and say, does he hold the ball too long sometimes? Yes, but he is one tough son of a gun in the pocket. He is not afraid of taking hits. He is, and for not being a very big guy, 6'2", about 215, he will take a shot. Like, he's going to stand in there as long as he has to deliver the ball. And I love that from him because I do think, back to your question about his dad's an NFL Hall of Famer. Is there, has he had that silver spoon? I'm sure he grew up with a lot of privilege, absolutely, but he plays tough, and his teammates respond to that. You can tell how much they love playing for him, and that's one of the things, part of my job is we all laugh about, like, the movie Draft Day of, like, no one went to the kid's birthday party. Everyone on that team is going to Shedeur Sanders' birthday party because you have to love the toughness that he plays with.
No, I like that you point that out. And when we think about teams that are going to be looking at quarterbacks, Raiders, Titans, Giants, Carolina Panthers, I'm probably leaving off a few. Who do you think has the best situation to be drafting a quarterback when they pick atop the draft and they'll be eyeing that position?
Man, that is a great question. I think the Titans have drafted really well as of today when we're recording. They have some veteran receivers. DeAndre Hopkins is a free agent after this year, but Calvin Ridley's a good player. They have two good running backs. So I would say the Titans situation is really good right now. Also, a head coach in Brian Callahan who has kind of an exciting offense. Now, Will Levis has not played well in that scheme. That's, I think, goes without debate. So it would just kind of depend on who's there, who's not. I think Carolina, you look at how well Andy Dalton's played, and it kind of makes you wonder, okay, how much of that was on Bryce Young? How much of it was on the lack of talent around him or the scheme and some unfamiliarity there? So I like what Carolina has, and I think with, Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, they have a couple really good receivers. They've invested in the offensive line, the tackle spot through the draft, the interior. They spent $100 million to fix the interior of that offensive line. And you're expecting that not only would you have an early pick in round one, you're going to have some early picks in subsequent rounds to try to get additional playmakers. So the Raiders spot is interesting because Devontae Adams wants out, and they have some young receivers there. I love Brock Bowers. But I think that's an offense that's really missing a lot of pieces right now.
And even when we look at, I'll just talk about Shedeur. I got to ask about Travis Hunter, who you alluded to is like his only guy to really throw to on offense. Of course, there's also Jimmy Horn Jr. But when you are looking at Travis Hunter, watching the tape, a guy that is such a sick athlete on both sides of the ball, do you think he's better off being a corner or a wide receiver at the next level?
I swear I didn't ask you to ask me this question, but my colleague Jordan Reed and I have this huge article coming out soon that basically is each of us arguing our side of this. And I'll give you a little teaser. I think he's a wide receiver. And a big part of that to me is he's 6'2", 185 pounds. He's a very lean, long body type. I don't want him throwing his shoulder into 220-pound receivers 10 times a game. I don't want him tackling. And he's a good tackler. He's a very active defender. That's not where I want his athleticism being used. I think he's better off with that body type, avoiding contact instead of inviting it and having to initiate it. He's a great player. You can make the case right now he's the Heisman front runner. He should very likely be a top 5 pick when it comes to the 2025 NFL draft. And it's going to be fun kind of debating that over the next 9 months. Is this guy, a wide receiver? Is he a corner? I think the argument for corner is he could be a full-time corner and play 10 to 15 snaps at receiver a game. It's unlikely that we would see him do the opposite. There's not really a package to get a fourth corner out there, 10, 15 snaps a game, but he's fascinating. The work ethic, the conditioning. Got a guy who played 137 snaps last week. That's ridiculous. Like the NFL players are playing like 60 to 70 snaps a week. He's playing double that. on a weekly basis. So, just the conditioning ability, and to do that at Baylor. But, they're in the heat of northern Texas this time of year. It's still in the 90s, and he's out there playing almost 140 snaps. So, I mean, just an amazing ability that he has to stay out there.
No, I love you point that out. And that's just the chemistry, going back to our Joplin, Missouri days. That's why I knew. I didn't know the article was coming out, but I knew you'd have a great answer for that. And I'm excited to see Travis Hunter if he just devotes himself to either position, because he's so good at both. It is a question of like, which one does he play, because it's hard to decide because he's such a high-level guy. Out of all the names I've dropped, when you're going through tape, you're putting together your mocks, who is that guy in this draft?
Oh my gosh. I mean, Travis Hunter is certainly up there. I think I surprised a lot of people because I think Will Johnson, the corner from Michigan, he's my favorite player in the class. He's my number one ranked player right now. He's amazing. He looks like Pat Surtain 2.0. This year he already has 2 interceptions. He's run both back for touchdowns. He's 6'2", 210 pounds. He's going to run a 4.4. He's physical. He has ball skills. He's the total package. He really is. So he's certainly in that mix. Luther Burden from Missouri, also a stud. This draft is really, really heavy, and Patriots fans are going to love this. It's really heavy at wide receiver. It's really heavy at corner. It's really heavy at defensive end. It's not a great – we talked about the quarterbacks. There's not that one quarterback that you're like, yep, let me trade 3 first-round picks for this player. There's not right now a great depth, and I know we'll talk about offensive tackle. There's not great depth at offensive tackle, but this is a draft. Running back, wide receiver on offense, pass rusher, corner on defense are the spots for sure.
Yeah, you just alluded to it. I love that you're saying it's deep in receiver, and you named one of those guys as Luther Burden out of Missouri, of course, a wide receiver. We got to talk tackles because that's what it's all about right now here in New England, watching the Patriots. And I remember you put out an article before the season kicked off, or opening weeks of the NFL, where you had the Patriots taking Kelvin Banks with the top 5 pick. It's either Will Campbell out of LSU or it's Kelvin Banks out of Texas. What sets them apart that you see Kelvin Banks being the better fit in New England?
I'll tell you, I'm not the biggest Will Campbell fan. A lot like Carson Beck, coming into this year, I had seen the potential, and I thought we were going to see, a stock up. I haven't seen that from him. I think his plays regress. So this could be a very long answer. Kelvin Banks just plays with more smooth ability. I think the agility to work left or right in the run game is very impressive. He gets downfield well, and he attacks linebackers with accuracy. But to just have the flexibility and the agility to get to that second level as consistently as he does is fantastic. And in the pass game, he's only 6'4", and that's going to be a big question. So when I watch a tackle and you're under 6'5", or it looks like you might have short arms, I immediately go to your feet. Are you a good enough athlete to cover up that lack of length with your feet? Now, he absolutely has that. Will Campbell on the other side has sub 33-inch arms, and despite the fact that he's 6'5", under 34 is where you start to kind of worry, and he's under 33, and I don't see the footwork to cover that up. He plays in an almost upright stance. He almost looks like an old school high school tailback lined up at left tackle with his hands on his knees. It's a really odd stance, and he loses a lot of leverage because of it, especially in the run game. It is impossible for him to get under the pads of defenders in that stance. So he's going to need reworked a little bit. Then you worry about the length. So I think Banks is far and away the superior tackle. And I would throw out names like Josh Simmons at Ohio State is probably getting closer to that Will Campbell level, but Banks is in a tier all by himself.
No, I love you point that out. And even like you said, it's a long answer, but I think all that is so important to know, especially I'll say back to you, a general manager like Elliot Wolf, he points out why he liked Vidarian Lowe at left tackle is because of his long arms. Arm length matters to him. He has his type of guy for receiver. If the arm length does matter, then it puts Kelvin Banks above Will Campbell. I think that is something that will have an effect in the draft. And we look at their situation. They need a guy to start day one. They went with a quarterback to develop, to sit. They need that tackle to be ready because this offense can't roll out an offensive line even close to what they have this year. And they need to be ready to play Drake May under a cost control contract. You talk to a lot of execs across the league. You obviously been watching college. You watch the pros forever. And I know you keep tabs around the league. What do you make of the Patriots situation? As everyone's saying, play Drake May, I'm with you. I say sit him because this offensive line is not going to get any better. I don't know how long they can play it, but what I'm asking here, Matt, is basically what do you make of the situation with Drake May and how the Patriots should play it with a bad offensive line and now a really banged up offensive line, likely losing David Andrews for the season?
Yeah, George, I said it when they drafted him. Do not play him his rookie year. These other quarterbacks who were drafted, it's like, sure, throw Bo Nix out there. I didn't think Drake should play Not just because the Patriots offense, but he had the least starting experience of any quarterback drafted in the first round this year. Now, Bo Nix and Michael Penix have been in college, for 6 years. So that certainly changes things. But that lack of experience, I thought the best thing for him would be to sit and learn while not getting his tail kicked behind a bad offensive line. Now, if it was a situation where you had a good offensive line and you had some receivers, kind of like Washington, where you have a scheme that's going to move the quarterback, you've got some good running backs, you've got some good receivers, okay, throw them out there. I didn't think New England had that. And through 5 weeks, I think tape backs that up. So I applaud Elliott Wolf and Gerard Mayo for staying the course and saying, we drafted Drake May for the future. And the best thing for this team long-term is not to win 3 more games in 2024. It's to set Drake up for 2025. So maybe he plays a couple games at the end of the season, but I would be very afraid, even at 6'4", 230 pounds, I would be afraid to put him back there and watch him take some of the hits that Jacoby Brissett has taken. So look at offensive tackle in round 1, and then I think you have to add playmakers in rounds 2 through 7. Obviously, free agency a big part of this, as you mentioned, with that cost-controlled rookie contracted quarterback. But they need weapons, and I think every mock draft you see from me here on out, it will be left tackle round 1, and then weapons in subsequent rounds.
Just take weapons the last 6 rounds. Just go weapon every round. But I agree. It's
why not, right?
It's a Kelvin Banks top 3, and then I'm looking at like a Trey Harris out of Ole Miss, a Yo Manor out of Stanford. See where it goes. And as they did with this with Polk and Javon Baker, take multiple weapons, keep throwing darts at the board, and eventually they're going to stick. We'll see what they do. And I love you point out the starts for Drake May. He was only a starter for 2 seasons at UNC. Someone like Jaden Daniels had over 50 games under his belt coming out of Arizona State, and of course LSU, and was in a great structure, and he has a good play caller like Cliff Kingsbury.